So today we get to hear from Jared Smith. He is the director of WebAIM. Is that right?
Associate director, sure.
Director of WebAIM, sure. I'll give you a promotion. He's the chief Pumbaa of WebAIM. I've known Jared for a very long time. We went to high school together, and we're college roommates actually. So I guess to say you've been working at WebAIM about since you graduated from college, right? Like a long time.
Yeah.
You've been a part of this movement to help make technology more accessible for all people for a very long time, which is impressive and a really, really cool life experience.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to come today. So yeah, I just appreciate the invite. As Justin said, I've known him since middle school. You know, we grew up together and spent a lot of time in high school, way back in the great work that you do. But I'm here to talk about WebAIM. WebAIM is the Web Accessibility in Mind project. We're a nonprofit web accessibility consultancy. We're based at the Center for Persons with Disabilities at Utah State. And WebAIM was founded in 1999. We're just wrapping up our 20th year of doing this work. So for about as long as there has been web accessibility, WebAIM has been doing this work. It started, our founder just happened to be administering this technology project and was at a conference and ran into an individual that was blind, and that blind individual said, you know, is your website accessible? And that didn't really have any meaning to her. She hadn't really considered accessibility for individuals with disabilities, and started to look into this. Wrote a grant to get some funding to help us to promote awareness and dissemination of information, primarily in higher education, and was grant funded. WebAIM's had a lot of different grants over the years to do research, awareness, dissemination, development, all in the field of web accessibility. I started with WebAIM it's been almost 20 years now, which is kind of amazing to me. But I was going to grad school and got a little programming job. I was doing cold fusion development. A lot of you probably don't even know what cold fusion, well, I should say was. I'm not even sure if it's still around. But I was doing some web design, web programming work. And WebAIM had started just a little bit before, right across the hall. And when my project ended, I came on with WebAIM, and they haven't been able to get rid of me. So it's been a wonderful career. WebAIM is, in those early years, we were doing a lot of research and grant type work at the university. And as we developed expertise in this area, we found there was a need, there was interest, there was demand for that expertise outside the university. So we started doing little consulting jobs and training, and started doing some evaluation work for clients. And that really just grew to where that's almost entirely what we do right now. In fact, right at the moment, we don't have any grant funding. We're working entirely off of the services and consulting that we provide. So over those years, WebAIM has developed, I think, a good reputation in the area of web accessibility. We have a lot of things that I'm going to share with you that I think have helped improve the lives of people with disabilities online. And that's really our mission. That's our goal, is to expand the potential of the web for people with disabilities. And we do that by empowering individuals and organizations by providing knowledge, technical skills, tools, organizational leadership strategies, and vision. You know, we've had a lot of opportunities over the years to expand into other types of areas with the expertise that we have, but we've really maintained that focus on web accessibility. Now, we do also mobile and native stuff. And we do document accessibility, but generally it's around that concept of online and digital accessibility, and really improving that for people with disabilities. So a little bit about us, a little bit more about us. There are 9 of us currently on staff. We have a lot of experience. Most of us have been doing this work for a long time. We do a lot of work in a wide variety of web technologies, scripting, multimedia. We do, there's a big overlap of usability and accessibility. So we do a lot of work there, HTML, ARIA. If you're familiar with ARIA, which is some technology for improving accessibility of web content. And over the years, we've worked really with hundreds. I don't know, I don't have an exact count. We're probably pushing 1,000 different clients that we've worked with, all from very small nonprofits to Fortune 100 corporations. And this is kind of our my NASCAR slide, right? It's just a sampling of some of the many hundreds of clients that we've worked with over the years. We've helped to improve accessibility of websites that many of you probably use every single day. And and it's always awesome. It's always fun to see the web hopefully improving a little bit. I always say that when we consider disability, it really is much more prevalent than a lot of people think. About 20% of the population reports a disability. I mean, over 1 billion people on the planet report some disability. And statistically, the vast majority of us will experience disability at some point in our lives. Most of that will be age-related, but we may experience some temporary or temporal disability along the way. And that's one thing that motivates me in the work that I do every day, is that by making the web more accessible to people with disabilities today, I'm really making it more accessible to my future self. So we've had a lot of fun over the years helping a lot of wide variety of clients improve their websites. So a little bit more about what WebAIM does and the services that we provide. They're primarily in 3 major categories: accessibility, evaluation and reporting, certification, and monitoring, where we will go out and take a look at a client's website, assess accessibility, and provide documentation and guidance for them. Also training, which is a big component of what we do, where we can come out on site and provide trainings. We've done that in 43 states, 15 different countries. So I've had an opportunity really to see much of the world as part of our training services. We also host, or at least used to before COVID hit, our on-site and hosted trainings are really on hold right now. But we've hosted trainings in Utah, and we've had 62 different hosted sessions where people have come in from all over the country, all over the world, to attend our trainings right here in Cache Valley. And again, those are on hold right now. And so we've transitioned a lot of that training to virtual training. So we host virtual trainings right now, where folks can just come in too, and we provide it's a 2-day virtual training. We also now do a lot of virtual trainings for our clients as well. I miss those on-site trainings, those interactions with directly with people. But the virtual transition has really worked very well for us, and there's a lot of demand for this type of training. And we also offer an online document accessibility course. So that's Word, PowerPoint, PDF, Excel, helping people just understand the techniques for ensuring that those documents are authored with accessibility in mind, so they can be available and accessible to individuals with disabilities. And then we do other types of technical assistance and consulting. So a little bit more just about some of those things that we do for our evaluation, reporting, and certification. Again, our goal is really to empower our clients, to give them the knowledge, the documentation they need to build and maintain their own accessibility. We've had a lot of requests over the years to fix things, to do remediation. You take our website and you make it accessible. And we don't do that. We do not do that work, because we want to focus on that empowerment, getting them to the point where they can build and maintain that accessibility over a long period of time. And that's one of the reasons why we've worked with so many clients, is we want to get in, we want to give them what they need, and then we get out. We let them do their thing, and we move on to somebody else to improve their website. We don't build reliance on our expertise, on our tools, our services. We want to get in and have them improve their websites and give them what they need, and then go to the next client. So it's really, I think, an effective way for us to help them with our website is to perform an audit testing on that. There are web content accessibility guidelines, which are international standards for accessibility that define technical requirements. They're not perfect. They don't always ensure, absolute accessibility, but they're a good measure of accessibility. And we perform most of our evaluation and testing to those standards. And when our clients meet those guidelines and we're able to verify that they meet those, we can provide a third-party certification or statement of conformance to those guidelines. And many of our clients see a lot of value in that, especially those that are maybe engaging with the government or have their own customers and clients. To have WebAIM as a third-party authority in this area to provide a certification that states, we have evaluated their site and found it to align with these guidelines, can be very valuable to them. I mentioned our trainings. There's a lot of stuff that happens in web accessibility. It's a kind of an interesting area of design and development. But we do offer full 1 and 2 day trainings. We really, customize our trainings to that audience. So we do trainings, specifically for designers, for QA, for developers, hard code coders, program managers, sometimes a combination of all of those audiences. And so anyway, there's more information on those services that we provide on the WebAIM site. And then we just do other types of technical assistance, things that don't fit into those other 2 buckets. We can answer questions. When we do evaluation work, we always include some technical assistance. We want our clients to feel like they can come back to us after we've provided them documentation and ask questions. We can help verify that what they are doing is done correctly, those types of things. That's we have technical assistance agreements with quite a few clients where just kind of on demand we can provide assistance for them along the way. So that's a little bit about WebAIM itself as an organization. I want to talk a little about some of the resources that we provide that might be helpful for you in the work that you are doing. Our website, webaim.org, is really just, I think, a great wealth of information and resources. We have dozens, I think 80 something articles and resources published on our site on a wide variety of materials. We have these quick references. I'll show you this real quick, but you can go to articles and there's details on just a lot of both technical and non-technical aspects of web accessibility. We have a bunch there on HTML, ARIA, CSS, things like that, document accessibility, testing and evaluation, legal requirements, policy, those types of things. So there's a bunch there. We also have a resources section that has several other things that I think might be helpful to you. One is our WCAG, that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines Checklist. What we have done with this checklist is we've taken what are really kind of complex, academic, very voluminous technical guidelines published by the W3C, and we've formulated, kind of pulled it all together into this brief checklist. It's 6 or 7 pages, but it covers the most important aspects of those guidelines. So this can be a great resource if you're building something or if you're testing or evaluating something and want to see how that aligns with those guidelines. We've created this checklist that can be helpful. We also have these quick references. We have this web accessibility for designers infographic that covers many aspects of design considerations for accessibility. We have quick references just on web accessibility principles and testing for web accessibility. All of these are, have these printable 1-page quick reference documents that you can refer to as well. So that's another area of the site that might be helpful to you. We also have a large community that we've built over the years, the decades, that can be maybe of use to you. Probably the most utilized community resource we have is our email discussion list. It has over 2,000 subscribers. We're really close to approaching 10,000 different email threads that have been posted. I'm not sure how many individual emails. I'm sure over 100,000, somewhere in that range. So it's been very active. Dates clear back to 1999. So that's a place, if you have questions, you could participate in our email discussion list or ask, or you can just go to the archives. Our archives have thousands and thousands of messages in them. If you have a question about web accessibility, there's a high likelihood that somebody has already asked that question on our email list, and you can search that list to see if maybe there's something in there that might be useful to you. We also have a monthly newsletter. We have a blog that we keep up to date. We're on Twitter. Our handle's WebAIM there if you want to follow us there. There's a Slack accessibility channel that we're also active on, and just helping the community more broadly with accessibility stuff. We also have a projects section on the website. I want to just highlight a few things that are there that might be of interest to you. This just outlines some of the research, the development projects that we do and have done at WebAIM. One very popular resource is our survey of screen reader users. This is something that we conduct about every 18 months or so, where we do a survey of users of screen readers to get information about them, about the technologies that they're using, how they utilize those technologies, their preferences, things like that. And this is a very popular resource that people utilize to see what it is that people that are using screen readers are doing. What are their preferences? For instance, what types of screen readers, what software programs are they actually utilizing? We usually get a few thousand respondents to that. And it's kind of an industry measure of what's happening in the field of at least screen reader technology. We've also done surveys for users with low vision, users with motor disabilities, and then we have done a couple surveys of web accessibility practitioners. That's people that, like you, that are building and implementing accessibility to give their feedback. We'll be launching another one of those surveys in the next month to update and get some additional information from the people that are doing web accessibility. We also have a WebAIM Million, and this is a research project that we started almost 2 years ago, but it's an annual analysis of the top 1 million homepages. So, and there's a lot of information in our article summary here that's on the WebAIM website. But yeah, we use an automated process to go out and check, look for accessibility issues on 1 million homepages. This last year, we also added a couple 100,000 other pages deeper within websites, just to get a kind of a benchmark, a sense of what is happening out there on the web when it comes to accessibility. A few things that we found in our last check: 98.1% of homepages had detectable failures with those accessibility guidelines. So it kind of tells us that there's a lot of issues out there. On average, the average homepage had 60 instances of inaccessibility. Imagine going to a homepage and having 60 things, links, buttons, pieces of text, navigation items, logos disappear, right? That's kind of what we're finding there. On average, 60 instances on the average homepage. And so the web, there's a lot of work to be done. WebAIM, part of our goal is to put ourselves out of work, to have the web be universally accessible, but we have a long ways to go.
Do you guys kind of group these statistics together so you can say the most common problem with accessibility on the web is this, or here are the top 10 most common problems, so that people can try to address those? Is that in this information there?
Yeah, we do quite a bit of analysis on the data that we collect. We do look at types of issues, patterns, things like that. We do alignment with like page language, page region. Yeah, so this report has a lot of information, and this does outline the most common failures. And I want to go through these because I think they are ones, because they're most common, they're also the ones that I think tend to be among the most impactful issues for users with disabilities. And they're also things that you need to be aware of, that you're building these types of things and need to be considering accessibility. By far the most common is low contrast text. So the guidelines define measures or thresholds for contrast, brightness difference between the text and the foreground. And that was by far the most common issue. 96.3% of homepages had at least one instance of low contrast text. But on average, they had lots of instances of low contrast text. So that's a big one, and that's readily testable, and it's generally easily addressed in design. Missing alternative text for images. So that's text that would be defined for an image that would be read by a screen reader for somebody that cannot see that image. 66% of homepages, so very common. This is like rule number one of accessibility. It's the foundational, it's the first requirement in those web content accessibility guidelines, is to have alternative text. Yeah, it is still the second most common accessibility issue, at least according to our study. These are automatically detectable failures, not all possible failures, but still it's a very common issue. Very easy to do, just a little piece of code in your page for each of those images to define that alternative text. Empty links and empty buttons were also in the top 5. So those would be links, buttons that do not have any text that would be identified for a screen reader user, or I would say for search engines. So most often those are graphical links or graphical buttons, sometimes maybe with CSS background images or icon fonts that do not present or contain any descriptive text as to what that link or button does. It's entirely graphical. Missing form input labels is also a big one. So that's text that would be adjacent to a form control that would describe that form control, say a text box for somebody that cannot see that adjacent text. And then missing document language is another one. It's like 8 or 9 characters, something like 10 characters you add to your HTML to identify that native document language. That's really important for screen reader users, because it helps ensure that that document is read in that appropriate language by their screen reader. So very easy. Almost all of these are pretty easy. There are things that can be generally defined as part of a requirements design development process, but very common on the web to have these types of issues. And there's a whole lot more in that WebAIM Million report that we publish every year that I think is insightful into the types of accessibility things that are out there. And our hope is that over time, we're going to see these numbers improve. We'll be doing it again first of next year. And we're hopeful that things are going to improve a little bit. I would probably add to those top errors also keyboard accessibility. That is something that's a little more difficult to test in an automated way, but just would stress the importance of doing keyboard testing as part of the things that you're building, ensuring that somebody that can't use a mouse or touchpad and is using the keyboard to interact with that page is able to perform all of the functionality that mouse users are. And we have articles on the WebAIM site that go into the details of testing using a keyboard. Okay, so this WebAIM Million analysis I mentioned was done via an automated process. We use the WAVE tool. WAVE is an accessibility evaluation tool that we have built. It's been in development, continual development since 2001. I do most of the programming and development and administration of the WAVE tool. There are a few different iterations or versions of the WAVE tool. We have an online version. It's wave.webaim.org. The idea with this is you can put in a website address and get an analysis of that. We also have Chrome and Firefox extensions, so they perform the analysis directly within the Chrome and Firefox browser. If you're doing any more than just a little bit of web accessibility testing, we recommend the extensions. They're especially helpful because they can do the testing in like password protected intranet pages, even local pages on your computer. So I know a lot of the work that you do is within an LMS and is not publicly accessible or available to our online testing tool, but you can test that entirely on your own, privately, securely in your browser using those extensions. We also have an API. The idea behind the API is you send it a URL, it sends you back data about accessibility, and we have a subscription API via our WAVE website. We also have a standalone or licensed API where you can install the brains of WAVE, the evaluation engine, into your own infrastructure and then test any number of pages. And so we have many that have licensed that API to do a wide variety of type of testing in their own infrastructures. We also have a collaboration with Pope Tech. It's pope.tech, and they have built an enterprise testing and reporting system based on the WAVE accessibility tool. So they do things like dashboarding, tracking, and reporting of accessibility across an entire website or web enterprise over time, user account management, all of that. And so that's another possibility. Another thing that maybe of interest to you, in just the last couple of months, they've also developed a Canvas integration of WAVE in the authoring system. So those that are using Canvas and creating content within Canvas, they can real easily use WAVE to check that content as it's being authored and look for some of those common accessibility issues and get feedback and documentation so they can address accessibility right within Canvas. And they're looking at other LMS integrations as well. So I want to just demonstrate WAVE just real quick, show you how it works. I'm just going to go to nasa.gov. I have the Chrome extension installed, so I can click this icon up here at the top right in the Chrome browser. When I hit that icon, WAVE does its magic. It looks at the page and then does a few things. One, it injects icons and indicators into the page to provide feedback about accessibility. So you don't just get this text report with code details. It's actually a visual presentation, very interactive, so you can see the accessibility right within the page. One thing that this does is that it also facilitates a human process for evaluation. We know that automated tools can't detect everything. In fact, they can maybe detect 30 to maybe 40, 45% of overall guideline conformance issues. So a human component always has to be part of a thorough accessibility testing process. And WAVE helps support that. There are things that are in here that can help a human assess more about accessibility than an automated tool can do all on its own. So, and then we have a sidebar that provides feedback about accessibility. So on this page, there have been 3 errors detected and 2 contrast errors. Errors are indicated by red icons. You can click on any icon to get feedback. This, for instance, is indicating that there's an empty link. So there's a link here that contains no text. That's going to pose an issue. If a screen reader user or keyboard user comes to that, there's no indication as to what that particular link does. This one over here on the right is a form label, is a form control that is missing a label. So there's no descriptive text that tells the user that this is the search input for the NASA site. And WAVE has been able to identify those types of errors. There are orange icons that indicate alerts. So this one says there's missing first level heading. So this is just saying, hey, this page, there's no heading, a primary heading here that would describe the content of this page. There are green icons that indicate likely accessibility features, or things that are probably good for accessibility, but still require a human assessment to determine whether it's actually supporting accessibility. So this green icon indicates there's a linked image with alternative text, and it has highlighted the logo there when I click on the icon. So that's indicating this image has alternative text, and it actually shows the alternative text for that image next to it. In this case, it's NASA, lowercase at the end there, which is a little interesting. But you can then assess that alternative text in the context of the image to determine whether that is equivalent, whether it's appropriate for that particular image. We have blue icons that indicate structural and semantic elements, things like page regions. This is the navigation region on the page. Here, the search region or landmark has been defined. We identify headings within the page, lists, iframes, tables, things like that. And then there's a purple set of icons, and purple indicates ARIA, which is Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's a way to add additional markup into a web page to enhance accessibility when it's necessary for screen reader users. And so you can use this visual presentation to get more information. There's a details panel that outlines all of those issues or icons or alerts features that have been presented within the page. There's a documentation panel or reference panel, so you can get details on any of those items within WAVE, and figure out what that icon is indicating, how it's impacting users, what you need to do to fix it, what WAVE tested for, and then any relevant standards and guidelines in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We have a structure panel that shows you the overall hierarchy and structure of the page based on HTML regions and landmarks, these significant page areas, and also heading structures. For instance, this page kind of has a weird structure. NASA, I'm going to turn off the styling here for just a minute, which can be helpful also for just linearizing that page. But NASA, for instance, has a header, then a main content region, then a footer, all at the very beginning of their page, and they're totally empty. There's nothing in them. And then they have a navigation region, but then their content comes at the very end with kind of no identifier. The main content is not in the main area that's been identified for this page. So if you understand those aspects of HTML, might be apparent that this kind of has a structure that probably is not reflecting very well of the actual page structure, and thus not supporting accessibility. And then we have a contrast panel, and the contrast panel here will highlight texts that do not meet the guideline requirements for contrast, and it'll give additional information about kind of those particular color combinations in the page and how they align with those accessibility guidelines. So we put a lot of work into WAVE. Hopefully it can be helpful in some of the work that you do, just to maybe identify high-level accessibility issues, maybe get a sense of accessibility for things that you're familiar with, or maybe the things that you're working on, and to maybe support a little bit better accessibility. And that's really all that I've got. But I want to leave some time. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
I just wanted to say thank you for that information. I think those are great tools that will come in handy for various projects. So thank you.
Good.
Go ahead, Scott.
I had two. One is I want to say thank you. The screen readers one is actually very helpful. I don't know if there's a particular screen reader that you use when you test or do things that way. I've attempted using NVDA. It's okay, but it's not great. But seeing your survey actually made me look and see, oh, okay, it is one of the more popular ones. I am using the right tool, kind of a thing. So that was good. My other question was, recently I've been introduced to a number of people who have vision impairments. And in particular, I find it interesting, they're trying to use mobile devices, whether they be some form of like large tablet, like an iPad or something. Do you have any tools or recommendations on how to troubleshoot when they're just attempting to browse the web or do something on those?
Yeah. Okay. So let me answer the first one first. As far as screen readers, I'm a Mac user, so on Mac it is the VoiceOver screen reader. So that's what I personally tend to use most often in the testing that I do. I don't do a lot of our client testing though. We have a full methodology that we go through for that, and we test across a variety of screen readers. NVDA on Windows and VoiceOver on Mac are our primary platforms for testing. VoiceOver with Safari, and then NVDA typically with Firefox. Those tend to be the most common combinations. But we also have access to JAWS, which is probably the second most common screen reader on Windows, and Narrator that comes with Windows. Less commonly used, but increasing in adoption. But it's right with Windows. And so we do testing across a pretty big variety of those screen readers. I would maybe caution that there are some considerations in really only testing on one platform, especially if it's VoiceOver on Mac, just because it functions a little bit different than screen readers on Windows. And so you would maybe want to consider that in your screen reader testing. We do, by the way, have articles on the WebAIM site for getting started with NVDA and JAWS for Windows, VoiceOver on Mac, and also an article on VoiceOver mobile for iOS devices. So if you haven't done screen reader testing, or maybe want to get a little more up to speed, we have articles that outline the most common keyboard commands and how you control them to do basic testing. It's pretty easy to do. With just a little bit of effort, you can do some of that basic screen reader testing. Really did get a good sense of what's happening for the end user. So good question. Your second question for mobile devices, that is something that we see as well. We see a very high adoption of mobile in the disability community, especially among those with visual disabilities. iPhones, for instance, tend to be wildly popular among the blind population. The last survey that we did, 69% of respondents indicated using iOS devices. That is way, way, way higher than the overall population. And a lot of that is because a lot of that built-in native good support for accessibility, both with the screen reader and for those with low vision. There are several different settings. Android was a little later to the game, but now also has good accessibility, but iPhone beat them to it. And so iOS is certainly very, very commonly used. So there are in the accessibility guidelines some specifications for mobile accessibility, specifically for interaction, for enlarging content, things like that. But yeah, there are some things in the guidelines that can help with that testing. We're working on some more dedicated mobile resources for the WebAIM site to help guide testing, things like that. But there are a wide variety of settings right in the operating system that you can use. On iOS, it is primarily just with the settings right within the phone. There typically is not a lot of additional software that is used for those with visual disabilities, because iOS is pretty limited in what it can, well, it's limited in its ability to have those third-party products affect the OS itself, but it has really, really amazing settings. One of the big ones is just changing color options and increasing the size of things for web content, mobile web content, as well as native apps, making sure that that works. Another real big one is keyboard testing on mobile. And that's something that's very, very often overlooked. But many users with visual disabilities are using a Bluetooth keyboard with their phone. Now, if I'm blind, I can fully interact with this device using touch, but it's more efficient to do that, especially to type and input text using a keyboard. And so an external Bluetooth keyboard is very common for interaction on mobile web and native apps. So make sure you're doing that testing. You can get a $10 Bluetooth keyboard and ensure that there's some basic testing with that keyboard is a big one. Hopefully I answered those questions. If you have follow-ups, please ask. Otherwise, I'm happy to hear any others you might have.
You know, one of the things that we have to do because we provide software in the education community is, of course, provide assurances to all of our customers that our products are compliant or that we have a plan to make them compliant. So maybe could I have you talk a little bit about the pathway to becoming compliant? Because just because you say, you know, maybe we pass a certain amount of automated tests and maybe, you know, our engineers have gone through our applications and we feel like we are compliant. I don't know if Brandon's on, but he's our designer. He's actually attended the training, and a lot of times I'll defer to him to say, hey, Brandon, you know, here's this weird use case. What do I need to do here? And he can usually answer that question. But even after all of that, we'll frequently have an institution go through and do their own audit, and they will come back with some items. So it seems like we've had this discussion about there's compliance, but there's also like a pathway to compliance and being able to document and tell people that, hey, here's where we're at, here's where we're going. We know about these things and we will continue to evolve. So maybe I've answered a lot of the questions in my question, but can you talk a little bit about that path and about how to make that journey?
Sure. You know, and I appreciate those words, path and journey, because it usually is that way. Some kind of view accessibility is, I mean, it is an end goal, but they see it as something like you do enough work and then you're done and we just don't have to worry about it anymore. Well, I promise you don't feel the same way about usability and security of your products, right? It's not like, oh, we did a security audit where, you know, we can check that box. We don't have to worry about it anymore, you know, because those things are continually changing and there are varying maybe opinions on what is secure, what is usable. So accessibility is the same way. It is really this progression or journey. But ultimately, your customers are asking you for things that are compliant, right? That are accessible. And so you need you need to have measures, you need to have a plan to get there, or at least closer to that, and documentation along the way. And it can is going to vary a little bit based on what it is you're talking about. But the guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, which is the newest version. They're currently working on a 2.2. It'll be out probably next year. But that really is the defined standard that almost everybody is using as a measure of compliance, of non-discrimination, especially in education. So while that is kind of a technical goal, you need to get there over time. And in some places you may either fall short and need documentation as to why that is, or as you said, you may encounter situations where somebody else is assessing those and has a different opinion, or maybe is testing in a different way and may get different results. And so having good documentation of those types of things along the way and a good understanding of accessibility is really helpful. So how do you get there? A lot of it is going to be just having a real process in place, planning for accessibility early, and not having it be a remediation process, but defined early in the design and development of these things. Now, remediation is always going to be an important part, but it's just not nearly as effective and is a heck of a lot more expensive than building it in from the get-go. And then regular testing at certain places throughout that process, and starting that much earlier than coding is a great place to start, where you're defining page structures and interaction components and widgets, and what are the considerations for accessibility for those early, so they're then built with those considerations is important. But yeah, it's a bit of a long answer. That's a lot. That's what we do, right? Is help people through that entire process and journey. So those are a few things. You mentioned that documentation, and most in education, it's very common to require what's called a voluntary product accessibility template. It's a formalized document for documenting accessibility for Section 508, which is a federal accessibility requirement, and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And part of those also have requirements beyond just the technical aspects of WCAG, but there are also declarations for things like, does it work for people that can't see? Does it work for people with motor disabilities? And that helps extend those, I think, into the area of just making sure that it's a good experience. When there are some of those conflicts or different interpretations, that's where having a good knowledge base of accessibility to come in and say, here is why we chose this, or maybe you're right, maybe this can be improved. This is something that we can address and make a little bit better. It's a good question. It's a big question, though.
Yeah, I figured it has been a big question. It's been a big process for us. So there's a couple of follow-up questions that came out of that discussion. One would be, do you have any tips for integrating an accessibility review process into your QA process? I assume that, like you say, security is an ongoing issue, usability is an ongoing issue, adding features is an ongoing issue. And so I would think that accessibility, like you say, should be an ongoing issue, and maybe should be integrated into our QA process. And then I had another question about the differences in the overlap of WCAG and 508, but I'll let you get to the QA one question first.
Yeah, so that's a good one. I think the most beneficial thing you can do is to have engineers, developers, designers that have at least some understanding of accessibility. And with that, I would say a commitment to that accessibility, and you obviously have that. I wouldn't be here if there wasn't some commitment to accessibility. But just that messaging that this is important. This is what we're going to do. These are the standards that we have defined for your products for accessibility. So then it doesn't become just a remediation, just a QA process. Minimizing the need for accessibility in that QA process by having everybody that's designing and developing doing some aspect of testing, or at least implementation of accessibility, is probably most beneficial. Very often we'll start work with organizations where accessibility is just a QA process, and what they find is new issues are introduced faster than they can fix them. It just cannot be only a QA process. So that's the first important aspect there. As far as QA itself, though, yes, you need to have some QA processes in place. And we have some documentation on that for testing, for screen reader testing, keyboard testing, definitely following the web content accessibility guidelines. Automated tools can also be handy for that, for continuous integration type processes, for, when code is checked in, committed, whatever, that there may be processes in place that are doing some testing on that code, at least to identify those apparent issues so that they're addressed initially, as opposed to, wow, we built this whole thing, now let's test and look at accessibility. But most of all, it's just knowledge. The cost of accessibility is always going to be a factor of your understanding and knowledge of accessibility, and having good people that understand this and are committed to it is really the key to wherever it is in that development life cycle. I'll go ahead and answer quickly your second question of just overlap of Section 508 and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They used to be very different. But as of a few years ago, the Section 508 guidelines, which are federal requirements, but also trickle down to states and higher ed institutions and things like that because of the strong influence of the federal government. The technical requirements for web content are WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0, not 2.1, which is the current version of WCAG, but 2.0 level A and level AA. Now, I would absolutely recommend looking at 2.1 because it is newer. It's also kind of been defined as a measure of discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we see a lot of lawsuits and complaints that are referencing WCAG 2.1, even though Section 508, the federal law, only requires 2.0. And so, yeah, it's pretty much the same. Section 508 does have some additional reporting requirements. I mentioned the voluntary product accessibility template documentation is very often required as part of a procurement. There's documentation, like I said, for declaring that things work for people with various types of disabilities beyond the technical guidelines. But functionally, as far as a process testing, implementation, Section 508 is WCAG 2.0. But also look at the 2.1 things because you're going to be asked about them for sure.
I think we're getting towards the end of the hour, so I don't want to keep taking up more of your time, but I want to say thanks for coming and presenting to us and helping us to understand this a little bit better, and hopefully we'll get a little bit better.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for having me.